Then I'm going to screen mirror. So we can talk a little bit about this. You guys can close your computers. Give me your rapt attention. Whee! There we are. Okay. I don't know what people are home are looking at. Okay, there we go. All righty. Can you guys at home see my screen and see the essay?
I can.
Oh, TV is nice and loud. I guess we better turn down that volume. All righty then. Okay. So remember how I said that you'll be writing an essay by hand, right? So I'll have paper and pen for you. And then those of you who are at home can be writing by hand and then sending me a picture. So what I'd like to do is choose a quote that I think fits with readings, or choose several, and then you get to pick from them. And I also say, using your knowledge of history, current events, or personal experience, in addition to 2 pieces of literature read during the semester, reflect on one of the following quotes. So reflect is kind of a broad statement, right? It means you can prove that it's true, right? Or that this theme has been addressed in the books that you have read, or the opposite. You know, you're not restricted to agreeing with what the quote says. All right, well, the first quote is, "You cannot swim for new horizons until you have courage to lose sight of the shore." Okay. 2 is, "A hero is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles." And so I don't know if you guys have ever seen an old Superman movie, but Christopher Reeve played Superman in a series of movies. Good looking, you know, large fellow who also was an equestrian, and he fell off his horse during a show and completely broke his back. And so he became a paraplegic, which means he was wheelchair bound and the only thing he could move was his head. Okay, so he went from Superman to completely paralyzed. And then 3, life's under no obligation to give us what we expect. Margaret Mitchell was a writer. She wrote, if anybody's heard of it, probably Lucy, you may have, called a book called Gone with the Wind that became a movie. It was about the Civil War in the South, the experiences in the South. For a while, they took it off the air because it kind of glorified the way slavery was. It had very much a perspective coming from the white plantation owners rather than the slaves, but they put it back on. But it was originally a book. Okay, so you're going to pick just one of those and then write a formal essay. Okay, so that means, and I've given kind of guidelines for you, right? The introduction, which is going to address the topic that you've chosen. You do not, you look with me, Lucy? You do not rewrite the quote. And I say that because it's kind of a waste of time, right? When you have a limited amount of time, you can simply refer to the quote or refer to the concept of the quote, right? But don't rewrite the quote. You could address it by the person who said it or just the concept of it. Okay, the quote is a jumping off point. Make sense? Okay. And then your thesis goes at the end. And I say here, place your thesis statement agreeing with, disagreeing with, or qualifying. And qualifying means, yeah, you know, I can kind of see that both ways. Okay, so reflecting gives you a broad range to work from. 3 body paragraphs. When you're handwriting and you have a time limit, sometimes if you're going in deeply, you can do 2. Okay. But the most important thing there is to provide really good details from the books or the stories. All right. You're not going to have quotes because you're not going to have the book in front of you. You're not going to have time to shuffle through. It has to be in your head. Okay. the details, okay? But I want solid details. You start with a topic sentence, which is like a mini thesis statement, and then you address it, and you use the title and the author of the books, okay? And I will probably add those on here to refresh your memory when you're writing by hand, okay? And then conclusion, okay? And so I also note at the bottom, because this essay is being completed within a 2-hour block, which leaves little time for editing, it will be evaluated as a rough draft, okay? What does that mean? I don't expect perfection. I expect solid ideas written the best you can, okay? But I don't expect perfection because we don't have time to go back and fix things, right? Okay. Anybody in my room have any questions on that? No. Okay. Anybody in Kabul or at home have any questions? Yeah. Sean has a question. You won't find it yet. I'll hand it out during that day. I'll give you each a sheet. I'll print it and hand it out. Yeah. Yeah. So you'll have that. I'm just giving you a little preview. All right. Anybody in Kabul have any questions?
Oh, teacher, our hook should be the quote from the book that we have read it.
I think it's not going to be the quote. I don't want you to rewrite the quote because it's a waste of time, but it should make reference to it or the concept. It can be your extension of what that quote is, right? So it's a sentence you write, but it's going to reflect that particular topic.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I'm going to turn off the TV here.
Teacher,
What? Yes, Fariba?
can you share this PDF for us because we want to read it?
Yes, but I'm going to do it later. Today was just
Okay,
a little
thank
preview.
you, teacher.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, after the class.
No, not after the class. You won't get it again until the exam. Yeah.
Oh,
I'm just giving you, yeah,
okay.
I'm just giving you a preview of how I do it. So,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. But of course, somebody's been recording this. So if you were to watch the recording, you could be pretty sly. Okay.
Okay. So, yes.
Yes, Marwa?
Teacher,
Yes.
it's Mr. Nazan.
Yeah. Hi, Nazanin.
Okay, teacher, thank you, teacher. Hi. About the concept of the examination, teacher, on there I saw in your screen, there was 3 quoted sentences. So we have to choose one of them and write essay about that?
Yes. Using your, you'll definitely use this book, A Thousand Blooded Suns, and then anything else that you've read. So some people have read The Alchemist. There's the short stories that we read. So, and if you have read other things beyond what I did in class, you're welcome to use those too. But you need to use at least 2 pieces of literature and address that quote as it is reflected in the literature. And then you can also use personal experience or historical information or current events. And you know, I'll be here to
Okay, teacher.
yeah, I'll be here to help you. So as you're writing, if you have questions, I'll be able to help you. But that will be Monday, December 18th. Okay, there's a 2-hour block.
Okay, teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a suitable and good, yeah, a suitable and good essay. How many words should it contain?
I'm not going to dictate how many words it should be. I just want the best answer you can give me in that amount of time.
Okay, teacher. So,
Okay.
so at least our essay should contain a body paragraph, I think.
Yeah, so it's the number of paragraphs more than the number of words. Okay, let's read. Do not know why I'm in the middle. I like seeing your pretty face, Zura. Don't know why. For some reason, my pretty face is in the middle of your pretty face, and I'm not sure why. It's supposed to be in the downside, right? You and I are right next to each other. It's lovely. It's like I'm in the room with you. All righty. So we're on chapter 36.
Teacher,
Yes. Yes. Here, I'm here. Lost whoever that was. Okay. All right, chapter 36.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you, Marwa.
Yeah. Should we read? Teacher, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Teacher, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Teacher,
No, I
can you hear me?
Marwa, maybe you better type your question.
Yeah. Should we read?
No, you're breaking up on me, Marwa. I'm sorry.
Should we read all these stories or something like some?
What I would say is you review the stories we've read or books that you've read so that, and just to refresh your memory. Okay. So we're not going to go back and reread things. I hope that's answering your question and that you could hear me. Love Wi-Fi. Love Wi-Fi in Kabul. I'm hoping we fix that soon. Okay. Okay.
Should we read
Right. Chapter 36.
You before signing us or just mention
Or Marwa.
can
Okay,
you
hold
hear
on.
me?
No, Marwa.
Okay.
All right, let's read. I just sent Marwa a message. Okay, Layla, page 36. I mean, chapter 36. Okay, you're going to find that this is an upsetting chapter. Okay, I'm going to put that out there right now. All right, so this is probably the most upsetting chapter, in my opinion, in the book. Okay. 36, Layla. As daylight steadily bleached darkness from the sky that spring morning of 1994, Layla became certain that Rashid knew. That at any moment he would drag her out of bed and ask whether she'd really taken him for such a car, such a donkey, that he wouldn't find out. But as on rang out, and then the morning sun was falling flat on the rooftops, and the roosters were crowing, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. Because remember, what has Layla been doing? She's been stealing from Rashid, right? In order to go to Pakistan. She could hear him now in the bathroom, the tapping of his razor against the edge of the basin. Then downstairs, moving about, heating tea, the keys jingled. Now he was crossing the yard, walking his bicycle. Layla peered through a crack in the living room curtains. She watched him pedal away, a big man on a small bicycle, the morning sun glaring off the handlebars. Layla? Miriam was in the doorway. Layla could tell that she hadn't slept either. She wondered if Miriam, too, had been seized all night by bouts of euphoria and attacks of mouth-drying anxiety. We'll leave in half an hour. In the back seat of the taxi, they did not speak. Aziza sat on Miriam's lap, clutching her doll, looking with wide-eyed puzzlement at the city speeding by. Ona, she cried, pointing at a group of little girls skipping rope. Mayim, Ona! Everywhere she looked, Layla saw Rashid. She spotted him coming out of barbershops with windows the color of coal dust, from tiny booths that sold partridges, from battered, open-fronted stores packed with old tires piled from floor to ceiling. She sank lower in her seat. Beside her, Miriam was muttering a prayer. Layla wished she could see her face, but Miriam was in a burqa. They both were, and all she could see was the glitter of her eyes through the grid. This was Layla's first time out of the house in weeks, discounting the short trip to the pawn shop the day before, where she had pushed her wedding ring across a glass counter, where she'd walk out, thrilled by the finality of it, knowing there was no going back. All around her now, Layla saw the consequences of the recent fighting, whose sounds she heard from the house. Homes that lay in roofless ruins of brick and jagged stone, gouged buildings with fallen beams poking through the holes, the charred, mangled husks of cars upended, sometimes stacked on top of each other, walls pocked by holes of every conceivable caliber, shattered glass everywhere. She saw a funeral procession marching toward a mosque, a black-clad old woman at the rear, tearing at her hair. They passed a cemetery littered with rock-piled graves and ragged Shahid flags fluttering in the breeze. Layla reached across the suitcase, wrapped her fingers around the softness of her daughter's arm. At the Lahore Gate bus station near Pol Mahmud Khan in East Kabul, a row of buses sat idling along the curbside. Men in turbans were busy heaving bundles and crates onto bus stops, securing suitcases down with ropes. Inside the station, men stood in a long line at the ticket booth. Burqa-clad women stood in groups and chatted, their belongings piled at their feet. Babies were bounced, children scolded for straying too far. Mujahideen militiamen patrolled the station and the curbside, barking curt orders here and there. They wore boots, pockles, dusty green fatigues. They all carried Kalashnikovs. Remember, those are the Russian rifles. Layla felt watched. She looked no one in the face, but she felt as though every person in this place knew that they were looking on with disapproval at what she and Miriam were doing. "Do you see anybody?" Layla asked. Miriam shifted Aziza in her arms. "I'm looking." This, Layla had known, would be the first risky part, finding a man suitable to pose with them as a family member. The freedoms and opportunities that women had enjoyed between 1978 and 1992 were a thing of the past now. Layla could still remember Bobby saying of those years of communist rule, "It's a good time to be a woman in Afghanistan, Layla." Since the Mujahideen takeover in April 1992, Afghanistan's name had been changed to the Islamic State of Afghanistan. The Supreme Court under Rabbini was filled now with hardliner mullahs who did away with the communist-era decrees that empowered women and instead passed rulings based on Sharia, strict Islamic laws that ordered women to cover, forbade their travel without a male relative, punished adultery with stoning, even if actual enforcement of these laws was sporadic at best. But they'd enforce them on us more, Layla said to Miriam, if they weren't so busy killing each other and us. Do you guys know what stoning is in the room? Yeah. Did we? Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you're about women. Yeah. The second risky part of this trip would come when they actually arrived in Pakistan. Already burdened with nearly 2 million Afghan refugees, Pakistan had closed its doors to Afghan in January of that year. Layla had heard that only those with visas would be admitted. But the border was porous, always had been, and Layla knew that thousands of Afghans were still crossing into Pakistan with either bribes or by proving humanitarian grounds. And there were always smugglers who could be hired. "We'll find a way when we get there," she told Miriam. "How about him?" Miriam said, motioning with her chin. "He doesn't look trustworthy. And him? Too old, and he's traveling with 2 other men." Eventually, Layla found him sitting outside on a park bench with a veiled woman at his side and a little boy in a skull cap, roughly Aziza's age, bouncing on his knee. He was tall and slender, bearded, wearing an open-collared shirt and an modest gray coat with missing buttons. "Wait here," she said to Miriam. Walking away, she again heard Miriam muttering a prayer. When Layla approached the young man, he looked up, shielded the sun from his eyes with a hand. "Forgive me, brother. But are you going to Peshawar? Yes, he said, squinting. I wonder if you can help us. Can you do us a favor? He passed the boy to his wife. He and Layla stepped away. What is it, Hamshira? She was encouraged to see that he had soft eyes, a kind face. She told him the story that she and Miriam had agreed on. She was a biwa, she said, a widow. She and her mother and daughter had no one left in Kabul. They were going to Peshawar to stay with her uncle. You want to come with my family, the young man said. I know it's Zalmat for you, but you look like a decent brother, and don't worry, Hamshira, I understand. It's no trouble. Let me go and buy your tickets. Thank you, brother. This is Sawab, a good deed. God will remember. She fished the envelope from her pocket beneath the burqa and passed it to him. In it was 1,100 Afghanis, or about half the money she'd stashed over the past year, plus the sale of the ring. He slipped the envelope into his trouser pocket. Wait here. She watched him enter the station. He returned a half hour later. It's best I hold on to your tickets, he said. The bus leaves in 1 hour at 11. We'll all board together. My name is Wakil. If they ask, and they shouldn't, I'll tell them you are my cousin. Layla gave him their names and he said he would remember. Stay close, he said. They sat on the bench adjacent to Wakil and his families. It was a sunny, warm morning, the sky streaked only by a few wispy clouds hovering in the distance over the hills. Miriam began feeding Aziza a few of the crackers she'd remembered to bring in their rush to pack. She offered one to Layla. I'll throw up, Layla laughed. I'm too excited. Me too. Thank you, Miriam. For what? For this. For coming with us, Layla said. I don't think I could do this alone. You won't have to. We're going to be all right, aren't we, Miriam? Where we are going? Miriam's hand slid across the bench and closed over hers. The Quran says Allah is the east and the west. Therefore, wherever you turn, there is Allah's purpose. Above, cried Aziza, pointing to a bus. My above. I see it, Aziza Joe, Miriam said. That's right, Bov. Soon we're all going to ride on a Bov. Oh, the things you're going to see. Layla smiled. She watched a carpenter in his shop across the street sawing wood, sending chips flying. She watched the cars bolting past, their windows coated with soot and grime. She watched the buses growling idly at the curb with peacocks, lions, rising suns, and glittery swords painted on their sides. In the warmth of the morning sun, Layla felt giddy and bold. She had another of those small sparks of euphoria, and when a stray dog with yellow eyes limped by, Layla leaned forward and pet its back. A few minutes before 11, a man with a bullhorn called for all passengers of Peshawar to begin boarding. The bus doors opened with a violent hydraulic hiss. A parade of travelers rushed toward it, scampering past each other to squeeze through. Wakil motioned toward Layla as he picked up his son. We're going, Layla said. Wakil led the way. As they approached the bus, Layla saw faces appear in the windows, noses and palms pressed to the glass. All around them, farewells were yelled. A young militia soldier was checking tickets at the bus door. Bov! Aziza cried. Wakil handed tickets to the soldier, who tore them in half and handed them back. Wakil let his wife board first. Layla saw a look pass between Wakil and the militiaman. Wakil, perched on the first step of the bus, leaned down and said something in his ear. The militiaman nodded. Layla's heart plummeted. You two with the child, step aside, the soldier said. Layla pretended not to hear. She went to climb the steps, but he grabbed her by the shoulder and roughly pulled her out of line. You too, he called to Miriam. Hurry up. You're holding up the line. What's the problem, brother? Layla said through numb lips. We have tickets. Didn't my cousin hand them to you? He made a shh motion with his finger and spoke in a low voice to another guard. The second guard, a rotund fellow with a scar down his right cheek, nodded. Follow me, this one said to Layla. We have to board the bus, Layla cried, aware that her voice was shaking. We have tickets. Why are you doing this? You're not going to get on this bus. You might as well accept that. You will follow me unless you want your little girl to see you dragged. As they were led to the truck, Layla looked over her shoulder and spotted Wakil's boy at the rear of the bus. The boy saw her too and waved happily. At the police station, at Torabaz Khan intersection, they were made to sit apart on opposite ends of a long, crowded corridor, between them a desk, behind which a man smoked one cigarette after another and clacked occasionally on a typewriter. 3 hours passed this way. Aziza tottered from Layla to Miriam, then back. She played with a paper clip that the man at the desk gave her. She finished the crackers. Eventually, she fell asleep in Miriam's lap. At around 3 o'clock, Layla was taken to an interview room. Miriam was made to wait with Aziza in the corridor. The man sitting on the other side of the desk in the interview room was in his 30s and wore civilian clothes, black suit, tie, black loafers. He had a neatly trimmed beard, short hair, and eyebrows that met. He stared at Layla, bouncing a pencil by the eraser end on the desk. "We know," he began, clearing his throat and politely covering his mouth with a fist, "that you have already told one lie today, Hamshira. The young man at the station was not your cousin. He told us as much himself. The question is whether you will tell more lies today. Personally, I advise you against it." "We were going to stay with my uncle," Layla said. "That's the truth." The policeman nodded. "The Hamshira in the corridor. She's your mother?" "Yes." "She has a Harati accent. You don't." "She was raised in Herat. I was born here in Kabul." "Of course. And you are widowed? You said you were. My condolences. And this uncle, this Kaka, where does he live? In Peshawar?" "Yes, you said that." He licked the point of his pencil and poised over a blank sheet of paper. "But where in Peshawar? Which neighborhood, please? Street name, sector number." Layla tried to push back the bubble of panic that was coming up in her chest. She gave the name of the only street she knew in Peshawar. She'd heard it mentioned once at a party Mammy had thrown when the Mujahideen had first come to Kabul. Jamrud Road. Oh, yes, same street as the Pearl Continental Hotel. He might have mentioned it. Layla seized this opportunity and said he had. The very same street, yes. Except the hotel is on Khyber Road. Layla could hear Aziza crying in the corridor. "My daughter's frightened. May I get her, brother?" "I prefer officer, and you'll be with her shortly. Do you have a telephone number for this uncle?" "I do. I did. Even with the burqa between them, Layla was not buffered from his penetrating eyes. "I'm so upset, I seem to have forgotten it." He sighed through his nose. He asked for the uncle's name, his wife's name. How many children did he have? What were their names? Where did he work? How old was he? His questions left Layla flustered. He put down his pencil, laced his fingers together, and leaned forward the way parents do when they want to convey something to a toddler. "You realize, Hamshira, that this is a crime for a woman to run away. We see it a lot, women traveling alone, claiming their husbands have died. Sometimes they're telling the truth, most times not. You can be imprisoned for running away. I assume you understand that, nay? Let us go, officer." She read the name on his lapel tag. "Officer Rahman, honor the meaning of your name and show compassion. What does it matter to you to let a mere 2 women go? What's the harm in releasing us? We're not criminals." "I can't." "I beg you, please. It's a matter of qanun, Hamshira, a matter of law," Rahman said, injecting his voice with a grave, self-important tone. "It is my responsibility, you see, to maintain order." In spite of her distraught state, Layla almost laughed. She was stunned that he'd used the word in the face of all that the Mujahideen factions had done. The murders, the lootings, the rapes, the tortures, the executions, the bombings, the tens of thousands of rockets they had fired at each other, heedless of all the innocent people who would die in the crossfire. Order. But she bit her tongue. "If you send us back," she said instead slowly, "there is no saying what he will do to us." She could see the effort it took him to keep his eyes from shifting. What a man does in his home is his business. "What about the law then, Officer Rahman?" Tears of rage stinging her eyes. "Will you be there to maintain order?" "As a matter of policy, we do not interfere with private family matters, Hamshira." "Of course you don't, when it benefits the man. And isn't this a private family matter, as you say? Isn't it?" He pushed back from his desk and stood up, straightened his jacket. "I believe this interview is finished. I must say, Hamshira, that you have made a very poor case for yourself. Very poor indeed. Now, if you would wait outside, I'll have a few words with your whoever she is." Layla began to protest, then to yell, and he had to summon the help of 2 more men to have her dragged out of his office. Miriam's interview lasted only a few minutes. When she came out, she looked shaken. "He asked so many questions," she said. "I'm sorry, Layla Jo. I'm not smart like you. He asked so many questions, I didn't know the answers. I'm sorry." "It's not your fault, Miriam," Layla said weakly. "It's mine. It's all my fault. Everything is my fault." It was past 6 o'clock when the police car pulled up in front of the house. Layla and Miriam were made to wait in the back seat, guarded by a mujahid soldier in a passenger seat. The driver was the one who got out of the car, who knocked on the door, who spoke to Rashid. It was he who motioned for them to come. Welcome home, the man in the front seat said, lighting a cigarette. You, he said to Miriam, you wait here. Miriam quietly took a seat on the couch. You two, upstairs. Rashid grabbed Layla by the elbow and pushed her up the steps. He was still wearing the shoes he wore to work, hadn't yet changed to his flip-flops, taken off his watch, hadn't even shed his coat yet. Layla pictured him as he must have been an hour or maybe minutes earlier, rushing from one room to the other, slamming doors, furious and incredulous, cursing under his breath. At the top of the stairs, Layla turned to him. She didn't want to do it. She said, I made her do it. She didn't want to. Layla didn't see the punch coming. One moment she was talking and the next she was on all fours, wide-eyed and red-faced, trying to draw a breath. It was as if a car had hit her at full speed in the tender place between the lower tip of the breastbone and the belly button. She realized that she had dropped Aziza, and Aziza was screaming. She tried to breathe again and could only make a husky, choking sound. Dribble hung from her mouth. Then she was being dragged by the hair. She saw Aziza lifted, saw her sandals slip off, her tiny feet kicking. Hair was ripped from Layla's scalp, her eyes watered with pain. She saw his foot kick open the door to Miriam's room, saw Aziza flung onto the bed. He let go of Layla's hair and she felt the toe of his shoe connect with her left buttock. She howled with pain as he slammed the door shut. A key rattled in the lock. Aziza was still screaming. Layla lay curled up on the floor, gasping. She pushed herself up on her hands, crawled to where Aziza lay on the bed. She reached for her daughter. Downstairs, the beating began. To Layla, the sounds she heard were those of a methodical, familiar proceeding. There was no cursing, no screaming, no pleading, no surprised yelps, only the systematic business of beating and being beaten, the thump, thump of something solid repeatedly striking flesh, someone hitting a wall with a thud, cloth ripping. Now and then, Layla heard running footsteps, a wordless chase, furniture turning over, glass shattering, then the thumping once more. Layla took Aziza in her arms. A warmth spread down the front of her dress when Aziza's bladder let go. Downstairs, the running and chasing finally stopped. There was a sound now like a wooden club repeatedly slapping the side of beef. Layla rocked Aziza until the sound stopped, and when she heard the screen door creak open and slam shut, she lowered Aziza to the ground and peeked out the window. She saw Rashid leading Miriam across the yard by the nape of her neck. Miriam was barefoot and doubled over. There was blood on his hands, blood on Miriam's face, her hair, down her neck and back. Her shirt had been ripped down the front. I'm so sorry, Miriam, Layla cried into the glass. She watched him shove Miriam into the tool shed. He went in, came out with a hammer and several long planks of wood. He shut the double doors to the shed, took a key from his pocket, worked the padlock. He tested the doors, then went around the back of the shed and fetched a ladder. A few minutes later, his face was in Layla's window, nails tucked in the corner of his mouth, his hair disheveled. There was a swath of blood on his brow. At the sight of him, Aziza shrieked and buried her face in Layla's armpit. Rashid began nailing boards across the window. The dark was total, impenetrable, and constant, without layer or texture. Rashid had filled the cracks between the boards with something, put a large, immovable object at the foot of the door so no light came from under it. Something had been stuffed in the keyhole. Layla found it impossible to tell the passage of time with her eyes, so she did it with her good ear. Azan and crowing roosters signaled morning. The sounds of plates clanking in the kitchen downstairs, the radio playing, meant evening. The first day, they groped and fumbled for each other in the dark. Layla couldn't see Aziza when she cried, when she went crawling. Ashi, Aziza mewled, Ashi. Soon, Layla kissed her daughter, aiming for the forehead, finding the crown of her head instead. We'll have milk soon. You just be patient. Be a good, patient little girl for Mammy, and I'll get you some Ashi. Layla sang her a few songs. Azan rang out a second time, and still Rashid had not given them any food, and worse, no water. That day, a thick, suffocating heat fell on them. The room turned into a pressure cooker. Layla dragged a dry tongue over her lips, thinking of the well outside, the water cold and fresh. Aziza kept crying, and Layla noticed with alarm that when she wiped her cheeks, her hands came back dry. She stripped the clothes off Aziza, tried to find something to fan her with, settled for blowing on her until she became lightheaded. Soon, Aziza stopped crawling around. She slipped in and out of sleep. Several times that day, Layla banged her fist against the walls, used up her energy screaming for help, hoping that a neighbor would hear, but no one came, and her shrieking only frightened Aziza, who began to cry again, a weak croaking sound. Layla slid to the ground. She thought guiltily of Miriam, beaten and bloodied, locked in this heat in the tool shed. Layla fell asleep at some point, her body baking in the heat. She had a dream that she and Aziza had run into Tariq. He was across the crowded street from them, beneath the awning of a tailor's shop. He was sitting on his haunches and sampling from a crate of figs. That's your father, Layla said. That man there, you see him? He's your real Baba. She called his name, but the street noise drowned her voice, and Tariq didn't hear. She woke up. Stay with me, Lucy. She woke up to the whistling of rockets shrieking overhead. Somewhere, the sky she couldn't see erupted with blasts and the long, frantic hammering of the machine gun fire. Layla closed her eyes. She woke again to Rashid's heavy footsteps in the hallway. She dragged herself to the door, slapped her palms against it. Just one glass, Rashid, not for me. Do it for her. You don't want her blood on your hands. He walked past. She began to plead with him. She begged for forgiveness, made promises. She cursed him. His door closed. The radio came on. The muezzin called azan a third time. Again the heat. Aziza became even more listless. She stopped crying, stopped moving altogether. Layla put her ear over Aziza's mouth, dreading each time that she could not hear the shallow whooshing of breath. Even this simple act of lifting herself made her head swim. She fell asleep, had dreams she could not remember. When she woke up, she checked on Aziza, felt the parched cracks of her lips, the faint pulse at her neck, lay down again. They would die here. If of that, Layla was sure now. But what she really dreaded was that she would outlast Aziza, who was young and brittle. For how much more could Aziza take? Aziza would die in this heat, and Layla would have to lie beside her stiffening little body and wait for her own death. Again, she fell asleep, woke up, fell asleep. The line between dream and wakefulness blurred. It wasn't roosters or azan that woke her up again, but the sound of something heavy being dragged. She heard rattling. Suddenly, the room was flooded with light. Her eyes screamed in protest. Layla raised her head, winced, and shielded her eyes. Through the cracks between her fingers, she saw a big, blurry silhouette standing in a rectangle of light. The silhouette moved. Now there was a shape crouching beside her, looming over her, and a voice in her ear. You try this again, and I will find you. I swear on the Prophet's name that I will find you, and when I do, there isn't a court in this God-forsaken country that will hold me accountable for what I will do. To Miriam first, then to her, and you last. I'll make you watch. You understand me? I'll make you watch. And with that, he left the room, but not before delivering a kick to the flank that would have Layla pissing blood for days. Oof. I've read this book so many times, and that gets me every time. All right. I think we have time for the next one, and that'll be it. Miriam, September 1996. So notice we've jumped 2 years, okay? 2.5 years later, Miriam awoke in the morning of September 27th, the sounds of shouting and whistling, firecrackers and music. She ran to the living room, found Layla already at the window, Aziza mounted on her shoulders. Layla turned and smiled. The Taliban are here, she said. Miriam had first heard of the Taliban 2 years before, in October 1994, when Rashid had brought home news that they had overthrown the warlords in Kandahar and taken the city. They were the guerrilla force, he said, made up of young Pashtun men whose families had fled to Pakistan during the war against the Soviets. Most of them had been raised, some even born, in refugee camps along the Pakistani border and in Pakistani madrasas, where they were schooled in Sharia by mullahs. Their leader was a mysterious, illiterate, one-eyed recluse named Mullah Omar, who, Rashid said with some amusement, called himself Amir ul Mumanin, leader of the faithful. It's true that these boys have no risha, no roots, Rashid said, addressing neither Miriam nor Layla. Ever since the failed escape 2.5 years ago, Miriam knew that she and Layla had become one and the same thing to him, equally wretched, equally deserving of his distrust, his disdain, and disregard. When he spoke, Miriam had the sense that he was having a conversation with himself, or with some invisible presence in the room, who, unlike her and Layla, was worthy of his opinions. They may have no past, he said, smoking and looking up at the ceiling. They may know nothing of the world or this country's history. Yes, and compared to them, Miriam here might as well be a university professor. Ha, all true. But look around you. What do you see? Corrupt, greedy Mujahideen commanders, armed to the teeth, rich off heroin, declaring jihad on one another and killing everyone in between. That's what. At least the Taliban are pure and incorruptible. At least they're decent Muslim boys. Wallah, when they come, they will clean up this place. They'll bring peace and order. People won't get shot anymore going out for milk. No more rockets. Think of it. For 2 years now, the Taliban had been making their way toward Kabul, taking cities from the Mujahideen, ending factional war wherever they settled. They had captured the Hazara commander Abdul Ali Mazari and executed him. For months, they'd settled in the southern outskirts of Kabul, firing on the city, exchanging rockets with Ahmad Shah Massoud. Earlier in September of '96, they had captured the cities of Jalalabad and Sorobi. The Taliban had one thing the Mujahideen did not, Rashid said. They were united. Let them come, he said. I, for one, will shower them with rose petals. They went out that day, the 4 of them, Rashid leading them from one bus to the next to greet their new world, their new leaders. In every battered neighborhood, Miriam found people materializing from the rubble and moving into the streets. She saw an old woman wasting handfuls of rice, tossing it at passers-by, a drooping, toothless smile on her face. 2 men were hugging by the remains of a gutted building. In the sky above them, the whistle, hiss, and pop of a few firecrackers set off by boys perched on rooftops. The national anthem played on cassette decks, competing with the honking of cars. Look, Mayam, Aziza pointed to a group of boys running down the Jada Maywand. They were pounding their fists into the air and dragging rusty cans tied to strings. They were yelling that Massoud and Rabbani had withdrawn from Kabul. Everywhere there were sharts, Allah Akbar. Miriam saw a bedsheet hanging from a window in Jeda Maywand. On it, someone had painted 3 words in big black letters, Zenda Bad Taliban, long live the Taliban. As they walked the streets, Miriam spotted more signs, painted on windows, nailed to doors, billowing from car antennas that proclaimed the same. Miriam saw her first Taliban later that day, in Pashtunistan Square, with Rashid, Layla, and Aziza. A melee of people were gathered there. Miriam saw people craning their necks, people crowded around the blue fountain in the center of the square, people perched on its dry bed. They were trying to get a view of the end of the square near the old Khyber restaurant. Rashid used his size to push and shove past the onlookers and led them to where someone was speaking through a loudspeaker. When Aziza saw, she let out a shriek and buried her face in Miriam's burqa. The loudspeaker voice belonged to a slender, bearded young man who wore a black turban. He was standing on some sort of makeshift scaffolding. In his free hand, he held a rocket launcher. Beside him, 2 bloodied men hung from ropes, tied to traffic light posts. Their clothes had been shredded. Their bloated faces had turned purple-blue. I know him, Miriam said, the one on the left. A young woman in front of Miriam turned around and said it was Najibullah. The other one was his brother. Miriam remembered Najibullah's plump, mustachioed face beaming from billboards and storefront windows during the Soviet years. She would later hear that the Taliban had dragged Najibullah from his sanctuary at the UN headquarters near Darul Aman Palace, that they had tortured him for hours, then tied his legs to a truck and dragged his lifeless body through the streets. He killed many, many Muslims, the young Talib was shouting through the loudspeaker. He spoke Farsi with a Pashto accent, then would switch to Pashto. He punctuated his words by pointing to the corpses with his weapon. His crimes are known to everybody. He was a communist and a kafir. This is what we do with infidels who commit crimes against Islam. Rashid was smirking. In Miriam's arms, Aziza began to cry. Smirking is like an unfriendly smile. The following day, Kabul was overrun by trucks. In Kahir Khana, in Sharanau, in Karta Parwan, in Wazir Akbar Khan, and Taimani, red Toyota trucks weaved through the streets. Armed, bearded men in black turbans sat on their beds. From each truck, a loudspeaker blared announcements, first in Farsi, then Pashto. The same message played from loudspeakers, perched atop mosques and on the radio, which was now known as the voice of Sharia. The message was also written in flyers, tossed into the streets. Miriam found one in the yard. Our Watan is now known as the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. These are the laws that we will enforce and you will obey. All citizens must pray 5 times a day. It is a prayer. If it is prayer time and you are caught doing something other, you will be beaten. All men will grow their beards. The correct length is at least 1 clenched fist beneath the chin. If you do not abide by this, you will be beaten. All boys will wear turbans. Boys in grade 1 through 6 will wear black turbans. Higher grades will wear white. All boys will wear Islamic clothes. Shirt collars will be buttoned. Singing is forbidden. Dancing is forbidden. Playing cards, playing chess, gambling, and kite flying are forbidden. Writing books, watching films, and painting pictures are forbidden. If you keep parakeets, you will be beaten. Your birds will be killed. If you steal, your hand will be cut off at the wrist. If you steal again, your foot will be cut off. If you are not Muslim, do not worship where you can be seen by Muslims. If you do, you will be beaten and imprisoned. If you are caught trying to convert a Muslim to your faith, you will be executed. Attention women. You will stay inside your homes at all times. It is not proper for women to wander aimlessly about the streets. If you go outside, you must be accompanied by a mahram, a male relative. If you are caught alone on the street, you will be beaten and sent home. You will not, under any circumstance, show your face. You will cover with burqa when outside. If you do not, you will be severely beaten. Cosmetics are forbidden. Jewelry is forbidden. You will not wear charming clothes. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not make eye contact with men. You will not laugh in public. If you do, you will be beaten. You will not paint your nails. If you do, you will lose a finger. Girls are forbidden from attending school. All schools for girls will be closed immediately. Women are forbidden from working. If you are found guilty of adultery, you will be stoned to death. Listen well. Obey. Allahu Akbar. Rashid turned off the radio. They were sitting in the living room floor, eating dinner less than a week after they'd seen Naja Hubal as a corpse, hanging by a rope. They can't make half the population stay home and do nothing, Layla said. Why not? Rashid said. For once, Miriam agreed with him. He'd done the same to her and Layla, in effect, had he not? Surely Layla saw that. This isn't some village, this is Kabul. Women are used to practicing law and medicine. They held office in the government. Rashid grinned, spoken like the arrogant daughter of a poetry-reading university man that you are. How urbane, how Tajik of you. You think this is some new radical idea the Taliban are bringing? Have you ever lived outside your precious little shell in Kabul, my ghoul? Ever cared to visit the real Afghanistan? The south, the east, along the tribal border with Pakistan? No, I have, and I can tell you that there are many places in this country that have always lived this way, or close enough anyhow. Not that you would know. I refuse to believe it, Layla said. They're not serious. What the Taliban did to Najibullah looked serious to me, Rashid said. Wouldn't you agree? He was a communist. He was the head of the secret police. Rashid laughed. Miriam heard the answer in his laugh, that in the eyes of the Taliban, being a communist and the leader of the dreaded KHAD made Najibullah only slightly more contemptible than women. Okay, 2 really hard chapters. Anybody have any questions? Yes, Paula has a question. Adultery means having sex outside of marriage. Anybody else? I would imagine that was a hard chapter for you guys in Kabul. It was hard for me, standing here in California.
It was a really hard chapter, but unfortunately true.
Yeah. And I think it's, something that we in other places need to hear. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, are you
I-
okay, teacher?
Yeah. Yes, Nazanin.
I said that, are you okay?
I can hear you.
Teacher, are you okay?
Am I okay?
Yes.
I'm crying. I can't help it. I can't read that chapter and not cry. I'm
Okay, teacher, sorry.
it's okay. You don't need to be sorry for me. Yeah. All right. Well, I love you guys. I'm glad you're with me.
The teacher.
All right. So I will send a copy of and for you guys, I'll put the writing assignment in OneNote. Okay. For this, it's going to be chapters. I think it's 33 through 36 is what it is. Okay. So I will put that in the group chat for you guys in Kabul and then OneNote for you guys here. Okay. All right.
Okay,
Have a good-
teacher, thank you.
Have a good history class.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
teacher,
Okay,
thank
teacher,
you.
bye-bye.
Bye, teacher. Thank you, teacher. Goodbye.
Bye.
Have a nice time. صدای ما رو میشنوید؟